We are heading into week 10 of the 2024 college football season. Time for my updated rankings. We're just about a week away from the first college football playoff rankings. So the committee are going to be putting their first rankings out next Tuesday. And we'll, of course, do our projection of how they're going to rank the teams. But I think this will be pretty similar to the way I'm ranking the teams because, again, we're looking at the resume. And we've made that shift several weeks ago where, we're ranking these teams based off of resume. And that's really about it. No eye tests, no team that I think is better than just looking at the resume. And that's how, again, we've been ranking the teams. So we're going to start at the bottom here. And we got 21 through 25. So Colorado makes their way into the rankings at number 25. They've been playing pretty good football. A win over a Cincinnati team that only had 2 losses. They don't really have a whole lot on their resume. They've beaten Baylor, UCF, Arizona. They've got some conference wins. Then, of course, that win over Cincinnati. We're looking for a signature win. But, as of right now, again, Baylor taking care of business, though. 6-2, great record. And again, it gets them into the rankings. There were no other 2-loss teams that that had any kind of resume that could make it in here. So Colorado's in. Ole Miss, kind of the same story. Don't really have a great resume. You look at wins over Wake Forest, South Carolina, Oklahoma. The loss to Kentucky definitely hurts them. If they didn't have a bad loss, if they had lost to, let's say, LSU and I know they don't play Alabama this year, but like LSU or Georgia, let's say they had lost to LSU and Georgia. No, they wouldn't have great wins, but those would be losses to good teams, and they wouldn't be penalized as much. And you might see Ole Miss higher in my rankings. I think they're a lot higher in the AP and Coaches Poll. Not really sure, but I've got them at 24. Missouri at 23. Terrible loss to Alabama. I don't mean that they lost to a bad team, but they were blown out. Really no offense. Of course, Brady Cook injured, and they need him. This offense needs Brady Cook. I think that is clear. I don't think Missouri's a great team, but again, you look at the other 2-loss teams, they're really no other teams. They've got the win over Vanderbilt. That's better than any of the wins that Ole Miss and Colorado have. So that's why Missouri's at 23. And also the fact that they've lost to 2 ranked teams, Texas A&M and Alabama. And again, they were blown out in those games, depending on how you want to look at that. Again, looking at the playoff committee's criteria, they're not supposed to look at winning margin. If Brady Cook had been healthy against Alabama, though, and they had gotten blown out again with him healthy, I don't think you couldn't ignore that. I mean, you just couldn't. But with the injury again, a game that was actually fairly close until right before halftime. Well, it was still kind of close at halftime. I'm not going to penalize Missouri too much for that. Army's sitting there at 7-0. But look, they haven't played anyone. When they play Notre Dame, it's probably going to be very similar to the Notre Dame-Navy game. And you could say, well, maybe Army shouldn't even be ranked because they haven't beaten anyone. But look, it's hard to go undefeated up to this point. They're 7-0. And again, that's enough for me to rank them. When you don't have teams, like if you had 2-loss teams with great resumes, then I would put a 2-loss team over Army. But we just don't have that. Most of our 2-loss teams just don't have very good resumes. Washington State, number 21, wins over Texas Tech, Washington. Not great wins, but their only loss came to a good Boise State team. And that's why, again, I've got Washington State ranked at 21. All right, here's 16 through 20. We've got Illinois coming in at number 20. Tough loss to Oregon, but, you look at who they've lost to. Oregon and Penn State, 2 top 5 teams, or top 10 teams, however you want to rank those teams, but 2 of the best teams in the country. 2 undefeated teams. Maybe, you can make an argument for the 2 of the top 2 or 3 teams. But, again, they've lost to really good teams. They have wins over Kansas, Nebraska, Purdue, and Michigan. The Michigan win, looks a little better after Michigan got the win over Michigan State, and Nebraska played Ohio State really tough. So Illinois still ranked for me. LSU at number 19, coming off of a tough loss on the road at Texas A&M. They look like the better team most of the game. And then Marcel Reed came in, and momentum took off for Texas A&M playing at home. LSU, they've got wins over South Carolina, UCLA, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. Arkansas is looking like a pretty good team, though. So that's a solid win. It's not a great win. South Carolina is a solid win. Ole Miss is a pretty good win. The USC loss does hurt this team, but USC, and we'll talk about this with Kansas State as well. I had this thought the other day. If you look at USC, Kansas, and Auburn, those 3 teams are very close to having totally different seasons, to being top 25 teams. They've all lost a bunch of close games. And so you can't just look at the record. And again, for LSU, the win over USC, especially when USC was healthy in week 1, because USC's had a lot of injuries, I don't view that as a horrible loss. It's obviously not a great loss, but I don't view that as a horrible loss. Alabama, number 18, wins over Georgia, Wisconsin, South Carolina, and Missouri. If this was the playoff committee, everyone would be saying that Missouri is just ranked. They're still in the rankings so that Alabama can have a top 25 win. that I'm sure that we'll get that argument if it does play out that way. But again, going back to Missouri, there just aren't any other 2-loss teams that I felt like should be in ahead of Missouri. But again, with Alabama, you've got that win over Georgia, and that's really what's looking good on their resume right now. Number 17, Boise State, they're 7-1. Big win over UNLV. UNLV is a quality win. Washington State's a quality win. And then their only loss came to Oregon in a game where they really outplayed them. I mean, if you take away a couple of special teams plays for Oregon, Boise State probably wins that game. So Boise State looking good. SMU at number 16. Just the one loss to an undefeated BYU team. They've got wins over TCU, Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, and Duke. Didn't look great against Duke, but again, we're not really looking at the win margin. And Duke's just a 2-loss team, so that's not a terrible team. Moving on to 11 through 15. I've got Clemson number 15, and this is a case of, I believe Clemson's better than this. I believe they are better than the 15th best team in the country, but they just don't have a resume. Florida State, NC State, Stanford, Wake Forest, Virginia, none of those are good wins. They have the one loss to Georgia, and at least that was a loss to a really good team, and that's really the only way I can justify even putting them at 15. Again, going by the resume. Now, if you go by the eye test, I think Clemson's a top 10 team, but we're not going by the eye test with these rankings. Now, next week, I'll probably do a playoff ranking projection, and then I'll probably do a different top 25 for me, where I'm just going to rank the teams based off of who I think the best teams are. And it'll be no resume or anything like that, just simply who I think would win on a neutral field. And so we'll probably shift to that style of top 25 next week. Kansas State, number 14. They have just one loss to an undefeated BYU team. They've got a lot of wins, not great wins, but wins that are piling up. Tulane, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Colorado, who now looks really good, West Virginia, Kansas. So they've definitely added a bunch of wins in there. And again, we come back to Kansas, everyone's going to say, well, they almost lost that game. Well, it's a rivalry game, and again, Kansas is much better than their record would indicate. Tennessee at number 13, wins over Oklahoma, NC State, Florida, and Alabama. The best win, of course, there is against Alabama. They do have a loss to Arkansas. Not a terrible loss. I think Arkansas is a solid team, but they are a 3-loss team, so you have to look at that. Pittsburgh at number 12, undefeated, wins over West Virginia, Cincinnati, North Carolina, Cal, and Syracuse. Really, they lack that signature win, but they are undefeated. And then Iowa State, number 11, same story there. They're undefeated, but they don't really have any great wins. Iowa, Houston, Baylor, West Virginia, and UCF. I felt like their wins were slightly better than Pitt, but those two teams and those two resumes are very, very even. Moving on to the top 10, we've got Texas A&M at number 10. Huge win over LSU. They've also got a win over Missouri. They beat Florida, Arkansas, Mississippi State. So you've got some solid wins in there and a couple of very good wins. Only loss came to Notre Dame, who's just ahead of them at number 9. Notre Dame blows out Navy. Very impressive win for them. Also with wins over Georgia Tech, Stanford, Louisville, and again, Texas A&M. Again, I don't know what the committee is going to do with the loss to Northern Illinois. I mean, it's going to be very interesting. They could have them way down in the rankings. They might say, boy, this is a terrible loss. We're going to penalize you. Or they may say, a loss is a loss, and they may have them in the top 5. I don't know what they're going to do. That will definitely be. And every year when we analyze the committee's rankings, and again, I've been doing this for several years, it changes year to year because you have different people in the room. Sometimes those bad losses, teams get penalized for them. Some years, they don't. It's really just about the wins. So that'll be very interesting to see next week. We go to number 8. That's Miami. Win over Florida State this weekend. Louisville's a decent win. Florida's a decent win. Virginia Tech's a decent win. They beat Cal. So they've got some okay wins. They're undefeated. They're 8-0. But still lacking that signature win. And, I don't know if they're going to really have an opportunity to get that during the season. Their whole schedule, it's not very tough. Indiana, number 7. I feel like their resume is a little bit better than Miami's. Wins over Maryland, UCLA, Northwestern, Nebraska, and Washington. And just performance-wise, they haven't had all those close games. yeah, resume-wise, maybe Miami does have a slight advantage, but again, we're not looking at winning margin, but we are looking at just like how you've controlled the games, and they've been in control of pretty much every game they've played, or I guess they have been in control of every game they played. I can't really remember them being down at any point. So Indiana's been rolling. Ohio State at number 6. Wins over Iowa, Michigan State, Nebraska. Those are decent wins, but they also lack a signature win. They really have not beaten a good team, and we saw them come pretty close to losing to Nebraska this past weekend. So Ohio State at number 6. Again, resume is just not there for them. They've got a big opportunity, though, against Penn State this weekend. All right, so this is my top 5. You see Texas at number 5. Longhorns with wins over Michigan, Michigan State, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt. Those are decent wins. And then they've also got their loss came to Georgia, who is, you see, number 2 for me. So I think Texas should be at 5. Penn State at number 4. Wins over West Virginia, Illinois, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin. But I have BYU ahead of Penn State. I think their resume is better. Wins over SMU and Kansas State. Those are top 25 wins. They've also beaten Baylor, Arizona, Oklahoma State, and UCF. So they have more Power 4 wins. Both teams are undefeated. I wouldn't say that Penn State has been that much better performance-wise. You look at that, was it Bowling Green, a game that was close for them? USC, they went to overtime. So, yeah, I don't think that if you look at the resumes, I think the advantage definitely goes to BYU here. And you see Georgia ahead of BYU, and some are going to say, well, BYU has a couple top 25 wins. Georgia has Clemson. They have Texas, 2 really good wins. They also have beat Kentucky, Auburn, and Mississippi State. And their one loss came to Alabama. So the argument here is just that the schedule that they've played. If BYU had played that schedule, they probably would have a loss. So I'm going to reward Georgia for playing a tough schedule, even though they have a loss. Again, they've played 3 really good teams, and to go 2-1 in those games is impressive. I've got Georgia at number 2, and again, a win over a top 5 team. That's just something that BYU does not have. So that's my reasoning for putting Georgia at 2. Oregon at number 1. Clearly should be number 1. They've got a win over Boise State and Illinois. A couple of good teams there. And then the win over Ohio State. That's the big win for them. Also, they beat UCLA, Mississippi State, Purdue. So they've got 6 wins over Power 4 teams, and then including BYU in that conversation. I know they're not Power 4, but they're a very solid team. So, yeah, it's clear to me that Oregon should be number 1 right now, and that's where I've got them ranked. So what do you guys think? Give me your thoughts on my rankings. Give me your top 25 down in the comments below.